The sun poured golden light over St. Peter's Square, gently illuminating the vast sea of people who stood in quiet anticipation. Vatican City, already rich in spiritual and historical depth, now glowed with the arrival of a new dawn. A new Pope? But this was no ordinary moment in church history. For the first time ever, a Filipino cardinal, a humble servant of faith named Luis Antonio Tagle, had been chosen to lead the Catholic Church. He stepped forward, now known to the world as Pope Louis XI, and as he did, the world held its breath. But even as hearts stirred in Rome across the English Channel, another extraordinary event unfolded. A message from a King Charles III, filled with warmth, reverence, and royal benediction. The King of the United Kingdom, defender of the Anglican faith, extending a personal blessing to a newly crowned pope. This had never happened before in such a heartfelt and direct manner. In fact, it was more than just a blessing, it was a bridge between centuries-old institutions that once stood on opposite sides of history. And now, with the weight of their respective crowns, one spiritual, the other royal, both leaders were signaling a new era, an era of respect, unity, and shared vision for humanity. Back in the Vatican, the atmosphere was electric. Cardinals robed in scarlet, priests from distant countries, nuns clutching rosaries, and pilgrims with tears in their eyes, all stood still as Pope Louis XI took his place. His presence was calm, almost serene. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with humility, urging unity, love, and compassion. But what made this moment even more surreal was the message making its way from London, a letter sealed with the emblem of Buckingham Palace, bearing the words of King Charles III himself. The letter was more than paper and ink. It was a royal tribute, a heartfelt expression of solidarity and hope. In it, the king offered his blessing, his congratulations, and his kind prayers. He acknowledged the weight that Pope Louis would now carry. He praised the new pope's journey, from the humble neighborhoods of the Philippines to the majestic seat of St. Peter. He recognized that this election was not just a change in leadership, but a shift in the spirit of the world. It reflected not just the king's personal values, but a growing need for spiritual leaders to unite beyond doctrine and creed. In a world struggling with division, war, mistrust, and fear, this act of interfaith diplomacy was like a soft light breaking through a storm. The king's words echoed far beyond palace walls. They were broadcast on international news, discussed among scholars, priests, and even common citizens. For once, faith and royalty stood not as relics of old power, but as symbols of modern peace and unity. As the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang out in celebration, the global community watched in awe. People tuned in from their homes, cafes, churches, mosques, temples, from London to Manila, from New York to Lagos. Pope Louis I stood as a beacon for a global Catholic Church that now truly looked like the world it served. And King Charles's blessing reminded everyone that leadership was not about control, but about service, humility, and shared humanity. Historically, the relationship between the British monarchy and the Vatican has been complex, marked by centuries of tension following the English Reformation. Yet here we were, witnessing a moment of reconciliation. Not through negotiations or treaties, but through a simple message of goodwill. It was a sign that old wounds could heal, that respect could be rebuilt, and that faith could transcend barriers. As Pope Louis I offered his first blessing to the crowd, his voice carried far and wide. He spoke not only of his hopes for the Church, but for the world, a world that needed more compassion, more unity, more love. His presence was calming, yet powerful. His words, simple, yet profound. And in those words, many could hear an echo of King Charles's own values: environmental stewardship, interfaith dialogue, and respect for tradition mixed with modern empathy. The king, too, had recently been deeply moved. Not long before this papal coronation, King Charles and Queen Camilla had met with the late Pope Francis, who had inspired millions with his humility and tireless service. That brief but significant meeting in Rome had left a lasting impression on the monarch. It had planted seeds of admiration, seeds that now bloomed into this beautiful gesture, a heartfelt tribute to the legacy of Pope Francis and an open-hearted welcome to Pope Louis I. As the royal letter arrived in Rome, escorted through dignified protocol and ceremonial process, its weight was not in its parchment, but in its message. That the king could bless a pope, and a pope could unite the world, signaled a powerful truth, that in times of global uncertainty, hope can rise from unexpected places. Church bells continued to ring. Flags flew across countries, world. Leaders issued their own statements, but it was ours the king's blessing that resonated most, because it reminded people that even with centuries of religious division, humanity always has a chance to come together. In villages in the Philippines, children watched Pope Louis on television with wide eyes and hopeful smiles. In London, the story filled morning papers and news channels, described as a turning point in modern religious diplomacy. In cathedrals and abbeys, people prayed for both the Pope and the King. It was as though the world had stopped, just for a moment, to honor something greater than politics or doctrine, the simple, sacred power of unity. This moment is more than symbolic. It's inspirational. It proves that leadership, when grounded in faith, humility, and compassion, can spark real change. It shows that even the oldest institutions can evolve, and that their evolution can guide the world towards peace. Pope Louis III is more than a church figure. He is a spiritual leader for all, especially the marginalized, the forgotten, and the seeking. And King Charles III's blessing isn't just royal etiquette. It is a sincere call for togetherness in a time of division. Their story, from Rome to London, is a story for the ages. It is a story of light, shining through history's darkest clouds. A Filipino pope, a British king, a shared vision, proof that faith can still inspire, royalty can still serve, and the world, even in its chaos, can still unite under symbols of hope. So, as the Vatican steps into a new chapter, under the leadership of Pope Louis I, and as King Charles continues to shape a monarchy of conscience and connection, the world watches not with fear, but with faith. The bells that rang out in Rome are not just for Catholics. They are for all people of goodwill, as of every faith and even of none, calling us back to what truly matters: peace, dignity, unity, and love. This royal blessing is not the end of a chapter. It is the beginning of a bridge, built not of stone or steel, but of a trust, dialogue, and mutual respect. And on this bridge, history walks hand